The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Rosewood Diner, casting warm patterns across the red vinyl booths. Thomas Bennett sat alone in the corner, his expensive suit looking slightly out of place among the modest surroundings. At 42, he had built an empire in real estate, but today, wealth felt meaningless. His daughter Emma, just 7 years old, sat across from him in her wheelchair. Her blonde hair was pulled into a small bun, and her face lit up with innocent joy despite the cerebral palsy that made even simple movements a challenge. Thomas watched her struggle to hold her fork, his heart heavy with a father's helpless love. A young waitress approached their table. She wore a simple blue work shirt and brown apron, her hair tied back practically. Her name tag read, Sophie. There was something genuine in her smile, something Thomas hadn't seen in the polished faces of his usual circles. "What can I get for you folks today?" Sophie asked, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to embrace them. Thomas ordered, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in worries about Emma's future. He barely noticed when Sophie returned with their food. What happened next would stay with him forever. Sophie set down the plates, then did something unexpected. Instead of hurrying away, she knelt beside Emma's chair, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Would you like some help, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with trust. Thomas started to protest, to say it wasn't necessary, but something stopped him. He watched as Sophie gently took a small piece of chicken, offering it to Emma with such natural tenderness that it brought a lump to his throat. "This is really good," Sophie said, smiling as Emma chewed happily. "Your dad picked a great lunch." There was no pity in Sophie's eyes. No awkwardness, just pure simple kindness. She talked to Emma about school, about favorite colors, about the stuffed rabbit she noticed in Emma's bag. Between bites, Sophie made Emma laugh with gentle jokes and funny faces. Thomas sat frozen, his coffee growing cold. In his world of nannies and therapists, everyone treated Emma with professional care. But this was different. This was human connection, offered freely, expecting nothing in return. When Emma had finished eating, Sophie wiped her mouth tenderly and said, "You're such a brave girl." "I think you're absolutely wonderful," Emma beamed. Thomas felt tears threatening. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. Sophie stood, brushing off her apron. "No thanks needed. She's a sweetheart." Then she moved on to her next table, as if what she'd done was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas left a $100 tip, but it felt insufficient. Over the following days, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment. He made inquiries and learned that Sophie was 26, working 2 jobs to support her sick mother. She had dropped out of nursing school when her mother's medical bills mounted. 2 weeks later, Thomas returned to the diner. Sophie recognized him immediately. "How's Emma?" she asked, that same genuine warmth in her voice. "She talks about you," Thomas said. "She calls you her angel," Sophie blushed. "Oh, she's precious," Thomas took a breath. "I've been thinking. I know you had to leave nursing school. I'd like to help with that." Sophie's eyes widened. "Sir, I couldn't—" "Please," Thomas interrupted gently. "You gave my daughter something money can't buy. You saw her as a person, not a disability. You have a gift for caring. The world needs more nurses like you would be." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Over coffee, they talked. Thomas learned about Sophie's dreams, her mother's cancer treatments, her student loans. He offered to pay for her education, no strings attached. Sophie was hesitant, proud, but Thomas persisted. "My daughter reminded me that day that kindness is the most valuable currency we have," he said. "Let me pay forward what you gave us." Eventually, Sophie agreed. 3 years later, Thomas sat in the audience as Sophie graduated nursing school with honors. Emma was there too, clapping excitedly from her wheelchair. Sophie had visited them often during her studies, becoming part of their small family. After the ceremony, Sophie knelt beside Emma just as she had that first day. "Thank you for teaching me that the smallest acts of love can change everything," she whispered. Emma hugged her tightly. Thomas watched them, his heart full. He had learned something profound from a young waitress on an ordinary afternoon. Kindness doesn't require wealth or status. It only requires seeing the humanity in others and responding with compassion. That simple act of feeding a child had rippled outward, changing 3 lives forever. Sophie now works in pediatric care, bringing her gift of genuine compassion to countless children. Emma has a lifelong friend who never sees her limitations, and Thomas learned that the most important investments aren't made in boardrooms. They're made in moments of grace, when one human being reaches out to another with simple, profound kindness. Sometimes the smallest gesture can change the world.